In our modern day, there are some people whose behavior we do not quite understand. Some of these people turn out to be actually fine, but they exhibit erratic behaviors like assaults and several attacks on other people. These sets of people, if caught and found guilty, are tried as criminals and locked away for some years in correctional facilities called prisons. However, there are distinguished sets of criminals as well who are in prison for unspeakable crimes. These crimes earn them a spot for the death row, the most feared list of criminals worldwide. Who are these people on this list? And what crimes did they commit? Join us as we explore a day on the most dangerous death row. Criminals on the death row list can be jailed for the most grievous crimes, especially with how their terrible acts were carried out. But sometimes you might not expect who they are and what led them to exhibit such behaviors. One such person on the death row list is John Wayne Gacy, the real-life Pennywise clown. We must have seen or heard about the 2017 Hollywood blockbuster It. The plot and series of events in this movie, despite being fiction, are enough to have nightmares at night. But did you know the movie was inspired by a real-life clown who did more terrible things than Pennywise? Well, that clown is John Wayne Gacy. Born on March 17, 1942, John Wayne Gacy was an American assailant who held people against their will and scourged them until they passed away. His victims were estimated to be at least 33 young men and boys, but nobody knew or suspected him to be such a criminal, as he regularly performed charitable events and showed up at children's hospitals as a clown. In fact, he was also invested in the clown business. He came up with the name Pogo the Clown or Patches the Clown, and acted accordingly to the personas. Gacy perpetuated most of his crimes inside his ranch-style house, which was located near Norridge, a village in Norwood Park Township in suburban Chicago. He commits his crimes by deceiving a victim and luring the person to his home before trying to perform a magic trick. This magic trick is Gacy's tool of deceit, as he would trick the victim into donning handcuffs, all under the pretense of a magic trick. Once the victim is handcuffed, Gacy immediately switches roles from a clown that wants to venture into magic to a vile assailant. He would then assault his captive before ending them with a garrote. At the time he was caught and instigated, 26 victims were buried in the crawlspace of his home, 4 were thrown into the Des Plaines River, and 3 others were buried somewhere else on his property. That brings the number of Gacy's victims that were discovered to 33. Who knows if there was more? Before his bad side came forth, Gacy was a well-doing businessman who managed 3 KFC restaurants before he began his own construction firm. He also married to Marilyn Myers, and the marriage produced a son and daughter. However, their love story was cut short when he divorced him in 1968 due to Gacy's conviction of sodomy toward a teenage boy in Waterloo, Iowa. He was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, but only served 18 months before he was released on parole in 1970. After his release, Gary settled down his own business and threw himself into the community as well. In his leisure time, Gacy would wear his clown costume and act like he was Pogo, a chirpy clown who helped the murderer regress into childhood. 2 years later, in 1972, Gacy met divorcee Carol Hoff and married her. That same year, Gacy took the life of his first victim. Before the end of 1975, he had been murdered twice more. This went on until he murdered at least 30 victims after his divorce from his second wife in 1976. An investigation into the sudden disappearance of Des Plaines teenager Robert Peast led to law enforcement arresting Gacy on December 21, 1978. His conviction for 33 assaults and killings, all carried out by one individual, covered the most homicides in the United States legal history. Gacy was sentenced to death on March 13, 1980, but while on death row at Menard Correctional Center, he spent much of his time painting. He was finally executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center on May 10, 1994. Hearing Gacy's story of living a double life is going to make you have second thoughts about clowns when you see them. But wait till you hear about John Edward Robinson. Robinson was the man who, to his Kansas neighbors, was a church-going family man. To the police, Robinson was known as a convicted con artist. However, nobody knew for over a decade that this church-going family man was convicted con artist was also a sadomasochistic monster who uses the internet and other forms to lure and manipulate at least 6 women. Robinson was born in Cicero, Illinois in December 1943 to a family of 4 other siblings. with an alcoholic father and disciplinarian mother. In 1957, he became an Eagle Scout and traveled to London with a group of scouts who performed before Queen Elizabeth II. He also became a student at Quigley Preparatory Seminary in Chicago, a private boys' school for boys intending to become priests. However, that didn't last long, as he dropped out after 1 year due to disciplinary issues. Robinson then moved to Morton Junior College, intending to be a medical radiographer, but he dropped out after 2 years. In 1964, he left Cicero for Kansas City and married Nancy Jo Lynch. 5 years later, Robinson was arrested in Kansas City for embezzling $33,000 from the medical practice of Dr. Wallace Graham, where he practiced as a radiographer using forged credentials. For his crimes, he was sentenced to 3 years probation. The following year, Robinson violated his probation sentence by leaving Kansas and moving to Chicago without the permission of his probation officer. In Chicago, he was able to get a job as an insurance salesman at the R.B. Jones Company, but that didn't last long, as he was arrested again in 1971. He was arrested for embezzling funds and was brought back to Kansas City, where his years of probation increased. His scheme of fraud, forgery, and being a con artist continued from 1975 to 1982, when he was arrested for embezzlement and check forgery, for which he was sentenced to 60 days in jail. All these while he was a scoutmaster, a Sunday school teacher, and a baseball coach. After Robinson was released, he went back to his old ways. When he formed a business and, under the guise of promising a fast investment return so his friend would be able to pay for his dying wife's health care, Robinson defrauded him of $25,000. Robinson started his assault spree in 1984 after forming 2 more fraudulent shell companies. He began by hiring a 19-year-old girl named Paula Godfrey, seemingly to work at his company as a sales representative. Godfrey told her family and friends that Robinson was sending her away for training. But after they failed to hear further updates from Godfrey, her parents filed a missing persons report. Since Godfrey was last seen by her daily preparing for a job offering by Robinson, the police questioned him, and he denied any knowledge of her whereabouts. A couple of days later, her parents got a typewritten letter with Godfrey's signature at the bottom, thanking Robinson for his help and assuring her family that she was okay and did not want to see her family. After her parents received that letter, the investigation was canceled because Godfrey was of legal age. Besides, there was no evidence of wrongdoing, but unfortunately no trace of Godfrey has ever been found till today. That went under the cover, and Robinson kept perpetuating his evil deeds. In 1985, Robinson disguised himself under the name John Osborne and came across Lisa Stasi and her 4-month-old daughter Tiffany at a women's shelter in Kansas City. He promised to get Stasi a job in Chicago, including an apartment with daycare for her infant. He made all these promises to Stasi only to ask for one thing in return. He asked her to sign several sheets of blank stationery. Some days later, Robinson called his brother Don and sister-in-law Helen, who had been unable to adopt the baby through traditional means. He told them he heard about a baby whose mother had committed suicide, so Don and his wife sought to adopt Tiffany. For $5,500 in supposedly legal fees, the couple had custody of Tiffany, including a set of authentic-looking adoption papers with the forged signatures of 2 lawyers and a judge. Just like that, Stasi was never heard from again, and Tiffany became part of another family until her identity was confirmed through DNA testing in 2000. Another victim of Robinson's, Catherine Clampett, left her child with her parents in Texas and moved to Kansas City in search of employment in 1987. She came across Robinson, who hired her and promised her travels to several places, including a new wardrobe. It wasn't sure if Catherine got all that Robinson promised her, as she vanished in June of that year. Till today, her missing persons case is still open, with no solution to her mysterious disappearance. From 1987 to 1993, Robinson was imprisoned due to his crimes. He was accused in Kansas of several fraud convictions and also in Missouri of another fraud conviction and violations of parole. During his sentence at the Western Missouri Correctional Facility, he met Beverly Bonner, the prison librarian at the time. After Robinson got released, she left her husband, a prison doctor, and moved to Kansas to work with him. After Robinson arranged for Bonner's alimony checks to be forwarded to a Kansas post office box, Bonnie was never heard from again. For several years, Bonner's mother kept on forwarding her alimony checks, and Robinson continued cashing them. During this period, the internet started buzzing. Once Robinson figured his way around it, he roamed online chat rooms using the name Slave Master in search of women who loved to play the role of a submissive partner during intercourses. His first online victim was Sheila Faith and her 15-year-old daughter Debbie, who was a wheelchair user due to spinal bifida. Robinson took advantage of the situation and portrayed himself as a wealthy businessman and philanthropist. He offered to pay Debbie's medical expenses and gave Sheila a job. After hearing this, a delightful Faith and her daughter moved from Fullerton, California to Kansas City and disappeared immediately. But Robinson kept cashing Faith's pension checks over the next 7 years. With his frequent presence on the internet, Robinson became well known in increasingly popular chat rooms. Through this means, he offered a job and relationship to Isabella Lukwa, a 21-year-old Polish immigrant living in Indiana. While doing this, he was still married to his wife, Nancy. Regardless, Robinson gave an engagement ring to Luka and took her to the county registrar, and they made payments for a marriage license that was never picked up. It wasn't sure if she believed she and Robinson were married, but she told her parents that she had been married and she never gave her husband's name. Sadly, she disappeared in the summer of 1999. When Robinson was asked about her whereabouts, he said that she had been caught smoking marijuana and got deported. Right around the time she disappeared, a licensed practical nurse named Suzette Troughton moved from Michigan to Kansas to be Robinson's partner and to travel with him submissively. Troughton's mother got a lot of typed letters, which her daughter signed and purportedly mailed while the couple was abroad, even though the envelopes all had Kansas City postmarks. The letters were, her mother said, uncharacteristically mistake-free. A few months later, Robinson informed Troughton's mother that she had escaped with an acquaintance after stealing money from him. Justice soon caught up with Robinson, though, as it became tough to cover his tracks. This was because he kept popping up in missing persons investigations, so he attracted the attention of law enforcement in Kansas and Missouri before he was finally arrested in June of 2000. Robinson was arrested at his farm in Kansas after a woman made a sexual battery complaint against him, and another accused him of stealing her sex toys. The theft charge was the straw that broke the camel's back, as investigators could obtain search warrants. On the farm, a task force discovered the decaying bodies of 2 women, later identified as Luka and Troughton, in 2 chemical drums. A similar search was also done across the state line in Missouri, where Robinson rented 2 garages. And there, investigators found 3 similar chemical drums containing corpses, eventually identified as Bonner alongside Faith and her daughter. All 5 women were found with head injuries. 2 years after his arrest, Robinson stood trial in Kansas over the cases of Troughton, Stassi, and Luka, along with several lesser charges. His trial was the most extended criminal trial in Kansas history, and he was eventually convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to death for the murders of Troughton and Luka, and life imprisonment for Stassi's murder because she was murdered before Kansas reinstated the death penalty. He also got a 5 to 20-year sentence for interrupting the parental custody of Stassi's baby, 20.5 years for kidnapping Troughton, and 7 months for theft. You must be thinking Robinson's Kansas convictions were already enough, but it was just getting started. He faced more charges in Missouri based on the evidence discovered in that state. Missouri aggressively wanted capital punishment convictions, so Robinson's attorneys wanted to avoid a trial there. However, Chris Koster, the Missouri prosecutor, ensured as a condition of any plea bargain that Robinson must lead authorities to the bodies of Clampett, Stassi, and Godfrey. Robinson declined bluntly, but Koster had to make a deal as soon as possible because his case was not completely airtight. Among other problems, there was no absolute evidence that any crimes had been committed within his jurisdiction. On the other hand, Robinson was pressured to plead guilty to avoid almost certain death sentence in Missouri, and failing that, yet another capital murder trial awaiting back in Kansas. When it started to look like the women's remains would never be found without Robinson's cooperation, an agreement had to be made. In a carefully scripted plea in October 2003, Robinson accepted that Koster had enough proof to convict him of capital murder for the demise of Godfrey, Bonner, Clampett, and the Faiths. Although his statement was practically a guilty plea and was accepted by the Missouri court, observers said that it was notably devoid of any specific acceptance of responsibility or remorse. Regardless, Robinson got a life sentence without the possibility of parole for all 5 murders. However, the case still wasn't completed in Kansas. In November 2015, the Kansas Supreme Court abandoned the Troughton and Stassi cases due to technicalities, but it upheld the Luka conviction and its accompanying death sentence. The ruling marked the first time Kansas's highest court has upheld a death sentence since capital punishment was reinstated there in 1994. However, Robinson still remains on death row at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas, waiting for his final day. Robinson's story is one for the books, judging from his versatility in committing different crimes. However, the case of John Famularo is an entirely different scenario. Familaro's case began on June 2, 1991, when 23-year-old Denise Huber attended a Morrissey concert in Los Angeles. After the concert, she went with her friends to have more fun at a Long Beach bar before partying with her friends. She told them she was heading to her parents' house, where she also lived, but that turned out to be the last time her friends were going to see Denise alive. The following day, her parents found out that she wasn't home from the previous night's outing, so they informed the police. As a search party was created to find Denise, a friend discovered a disabled car, which turned out to be Denise's, on a nearby Orange County freeway. The car's battery had been drained by emergency flashers activated the night before. Everyone was shocked at this discovery as they kept searching the environments and notifying people of her sudden absence, but no one seemed to know what had happened to Denise. 3 years later, on July 13, 1994, a woman living in Prescott, Arizona, needed to buy paint, so she purchased some from a man named John Famularo. As she got to Famularo's residence, she observed a rental truck parked in the driveway's rear. It showed that the truck had been there for quite some time, making it look somewhat suspicious in the environment. To confirm her suspicions, this woman wrote the license plate number down and asked the sheriff's department to run details on it. When the results came back, it turned out to be a stolen vehicle from Orange County, California. When they found out it was a stolen vehicle, law enforcement moved a step further in the case by sending an officer to the area for investigations. When a deputy knocked on Famularo's front door and got no response, he went towards the stolen truck to see if he could get any clues. As he did this survey, he observed an electrical cord that was wired toward a freezer in the truck. Upon seeing this, the deputy thought he had just discovered a mobile drug lab, as they were rampant back in the day, so he called in a locksmith to open the back of the truck to gain access. As he entered the truck and lifted the freezer's lid, he discovered a handcuffed body wrapped in garbage bags, which turned out to be Denise Huber. Famularo was arrested immediately, and from the police investigations, Famularo probably kidnapped Denise from the freeway and then took her against her will to his deserted warehouse business location. It was at this place Famularo scourged her before her demise. When experts examined Denise's body, she saw that she had suffered major head injuries before she passed away. That was enough evidence, so Famularo was convicted immediately and put on trial. He was given capital punishment in 1997, but still resides on death row in California despite several appeals. At times, these death row inmates are scrutinized for mental checkups, as some of them aren't always in the right frame of mind when they go about their daily activities, which might lead to them committing a crime. That is why we would be observing Skylar DeLeon, a ruthless thief and murderer. In November 2004, Tom and Jackie Hawks were having a time of their lives as they spent their retirement cruising the Sea of Cortez in the Pacific Ocean in their elegant yacht. But having got the news about the birth of their first grandchild, they wished to stop their retirement and return to Prescott, Arizona to be near their newly born grandchild. As they planned their relocation, they placed an advertisement in a local boating magazine about their yacht, offering the vessel for sale at over $400,000. Suddenly, they got a call from Skylar DeLeon from Long Beach, California, about the yacht's purchase. When the old couple picked up the call, they noticed something wasn't right. DeLeon was deep in debt, but wasn't frantically searching for a houseboat for his wife, Jennifer, and children. The Hawks were doubtful about the entire situation, judging if such a young person would have the assets to buy their boat. But when DeLeon returned for a second meeting and brought along his pregnant wife and daughter, they decided that his intentions could be sincere. Since they trusted him and left to be a potential client, the couple agreed to go on a test run with DeLeon alongside 2 other men. Among these men was one who claimed to be DeLeon's accountant, but that was all a facade, as the accountant was actually John Kennedy. John Kennedy was a hired member of the Long Beach street gang who, with a third accomplice, Alfonso Machan, fought Tom Hawks and finally overpowered him. Having done that, they forced Tom and Jackie to sign documents of the sale in regard to the cabin cruiser, and a document giving over power of attorney to DeLeon. Once they signed the papers, DeLeon had them bound together with an anchor and threw them overboard, with the couple drowning into the ocean's darkness. When the police found out that the Hawks were missing and their luxury boat was found at the dock, tied in a careless manner, they began investigations. These investigations led the police to Skylar DeLeon, and they discovered significant evidence of the crime. That got all the perpetrators arrested. In fact, Alonzo Macian quickly cut a deal for 20 years in prison with a confession that gave specific information implicating De Leon, his wife, and John Kennedy, so the trio was found guilty of first-degree murder. De Leon and Kennedy were sentenced to death, while the now-divorced wife got life without parole, escaping the death row fate of her ex-husband and Kennedy. Which of these death row inmates do you think committed the most heinous crime? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below.